Hi there, LaFeyra Rue here. Welcome to Rue's Garden Guide. Today I'm going to be taking you through a houseplant basics guide on lighting. But before we get started, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be notified in the future of more plant guides to come. I do also want to remind you guys that I am an amateur gardener, so I am putting these videos together based on research, and I'm not a scientist on a lot of this as well, so this is the information that I would like you guys to do your own research on as well, if that's something you want to do. And also, if you have any experiences of your own that would help people that are watching this video, make sure to put that down in the comments. So I asked some friends of mine for questions that they would have asked or would have wanted to know when they first started taking care of houseplants. And I have those notes collected over here on my computer, so I will be referencing those from time to time. But one of the first questions that I got was how much light is actually needed when an indoor plant label says low, medium, or full light. So you've probably been to a garden center in the spring for vegetables and outdoor plants, where you pull out the tag, it has all your information, including how big it gets, how much water, and how much light. Those plant labels will break the light needs into shade, part sun, and full sun, which can respectively be broken down into the amount of hours per day that plant needs to survive, which is 3 hours, 3 to 6 hours with protection during the middle of the day, 3 to 6 hours, and then 6+ hours. Now, indoor plant labels don't have those ratings because they break it down into the intensity of light that the plant likes to have. You've probably also heard the terms bright indirect, and indirect light for indoor houseplants, especially succulents. And to break that down into a little bit more visual terms, so I have this window here. The plants that I have up here on this shelf are all getting bright, direct sunlight. They are right directly in the window, so they are getting direct sunlight throughout the day. This plant here, my Monstera, would be considered to get bright indirect light. It is about 3 to 6 feet from that window, so it's still getting sunlight directly from the window, so it is then obviously bright indirect. Anything past that 6-foot range is going to be considered indirect light. Your plant will still be getting some of the vestiges coming in from the window, but it's going to be taking in less efficiently, basically. The biggest thing to remember though is that since they do break it down into intensity on those low, medium, and full recommendations, it doesn't ever tell you how much per day that those plants need to be getting. In the research that I did for this video, the best recommendation, the most general recommendation I was able to find is anywhere from 8 to 10 hours of light for your plants to do well in your home. If you live in a far northern or far southern hemisphere, such as myself, you may need to provide some supplemental lighting for your plants. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But the other thing that you do need to remember about this is that all of these recommendations that I've given you in this section are intended for the plant to thrive. The plant thriving means that it's going to be continuing to put on a significant amount, I shouldn't even say significant, a good amount of growth, and that it will continue producing a good root system. You can get away with giving your plants less of these recommendations and still have them survive just fine. If you've picked up a nice succulent and you don't have room to let it get much bigger, you can cut these recommendations by maybe a third and still have that plant be just fine. It'll just stay compact, it'll stay in the pot that you probably bought it in, and there shouldn't be any harm. The next question that I got was, do artificial lights work to grow plants? And before I get further into this, I do want to mention that I am not a scientist. I'm going to get through this section as succinctly as possible without confusing you guys, because this was kind of confusing to me as well. But the short answer is yes, absolutely. You can use artificial lighting to grow your plants. The best example being if you've gone into a doctor's office that doesn't have any windows and they have office plants that seem to be doing just fine. The biggest thing about that I've noticed is that most offices tend to keep their lights on for pretty much 24 hours a day, so that plant is receiving constant light, has a constant light source. Now, getting into light bulbs, you're going to have, from my understanding, about 4 categories of lights. You have your incandescents, you have your halogens, your fluorescents, and your LEDs. I may be missing some that are usually recommended for growing plants, but these are the ones that I found most recommended in the case of light bulbs. Incandescent is the old style light bulb, which has the filament in the middle. It tends to get very hot. They're not as widely used anymore because they're not as energy efficient. I don't know much about halogens, so I'm kind of gonna gloss over that one. Obviously, fluorescents are something you're going to see in like a workshop or in big box stores. And then LEDs are the obviously light emitting diodes. You find them in TVs nowadays. They're the high-end, I shouldn't even say high-end, they're not super expensive nowadays, but they are the most efficient light bulb that you can buy on the market nowadays. When you go to buy a light bulb though, you're going to have a list of specs on that light bulb that you may want to look at. And the first one that people usually look for is wattage. Wattage doesn't amount to much when you are looking for growing plants. It's just going to tell you how much you should expect to cost to run that light bulb in your home. You should be able to, on your report that you get from the electric company, find out how much it takes to run a certain unit of electricity, and then a quick calculation should be able to tell you how much that light bulb is going to cost you per year. One thing to note about that though, especially with LEDs, you are going to see LEDs that usually have a big wattage right on the front, and it says like 140 watts. That's usually not the wattage those LEDs are actually at. If you look in the smaller print, it will say 140 watt replacement bulb. And that's because a lot of people are still used to using incandescents, which were always rated in wattage for how bright their light would be, versus LEDs, which are usually pretty bright anyways, and can replace bulbs for less wattage running themselves than previous bulbs used to run. The next thing that you're going to usually see on a packaging is lumens, or sometimes lux. Both of these units are metric units for lighting. You may also see it as either a candela or a foot candle for imperial. I don't usually see those on packaging though, it's usually in metrics. Lumens, and this is where it's going to start to get complicated and sciencey, so I actually do have a video that some videos that I watched that I will try to link down below to let you guys get into the science behind light bulbs. But lumens is your light intensity. So if you have the bulb over a certain area, how intense is that light going to be? In short, it's your total light output from the bulb. This unit of measurement is usually used for commercial settings. So a contractor will come into, say, a big box store, and they'll say, okay, how many lumens do I need to be able to light this entire space? Lux, on the other hand, is your illumination. So how many lux does it produce to light up, say, like a face? This one is kind of self-explanatory if you think about it. So as I have a light bulb here, the further away I get from that light bulb, the less it's going to illuminate my face. This unit of measurement is a little bit more useful to look at if you're lighting a smaller space, such as say like a seedling or cutting area, or you're specifically trying to maybe light up a couple of plants. You may not usually find lux on packaging though, so that can be a small problem. The thing to note about these two units of measurement is that this is basically going to tell you how hot your bulb may run, or how much output it's going to give you. So do you have a really bright light bulb like this one that I have here for my grow lights? Is it going to be really bright and intense? Is it going to, if you put your hand up to it, is it going to be really hot with a high lux? If you are growing mature plants, a high lux may not be a good idea depending on what kind of lamp you put it into, because that could potentially burn your plants. So that is a little something you should consider when you're buying a bulb to maintain your plants, either permanently inside or to keep them alive throughout the dormant season. The next thing that you may see on a packaging, it's not always there, you'll mostly find these on fluorescent lightings, is the Kelvin or the CCT. Kelvin is a unit of temperature, and in the terms of light bulbs, what it's telling you is the color temperature. Do you have a bulb that is considered 6500 Kelvin? It's probably going to be a daytime bulb or emitting bright white blue light. The lower your Kelvin rating, the more orangey red your bulbs are going to look. This can be useful, especially for cuttings. Most cuttings and seedling bulbs are going to be labeled as daylight plants because they simulate what the sun looks like and can fool a plant into thinking that they are sitting in natural daylight. On the topic of color temperature, I'd actually like to address a myth or misconception in the plant community about the fact that plants only absorb and utilize red and blue light. While it's not exactly untrue, plants actually utilize the entire spectrum from violet up to infrared for their processes of photosynthesis. I watched a video that I will link down below, and I would highly recommend watching it if you'd like to get into the scientific side of this, but I'll try to keep this as concise as possible because there was a lot of info in it. The first thing is that in a natural state with the leaf right on the plant, the leaf is going to absorb red and blue light extremely efficiently. So it's going to penetrate very shallowly into the leaf. It's going to utilize it as quickly as possible. And then the green and yellow spectrums are going to penetrate further into the leaf, which is most likely why it reflects further back and shows as green to our eyes. In the video, he talked about where this misconception came from in a scientific study where the scientist actually liquefied the plant that he was using to test his theory, and later on there was another scientist who did the study of the plant in its natural state. Again, I'd highly recommend watching this video. It was very informative. But he also talks about the fact that blue light is how plants determine whether or not they're in full sun or full shade. Blue light has a hard time penetrating a leaf canopy. So it will tell the plant that, hey, I'm in shade, you need to grow longer. If you give a plant a significant amount of blue light, it's going to grow very compact and very stunted. If you deprive it of blue light, that plant will then grow leggy as it starts to try and reach for what it's trying to find, which is sunlight, which contains a lot of blue light in it because it is coming from the sun. It was not addressed in the video, but it is suggested that red light is used by plants, especially when they're fruiting, when they're producing fruit, and when they're producing flowers, potentially as a source of extra energy, considering that UV light is kind of like a boost to photosynthesis, so as you get closer to the red spectrum and into infrared, it might be useful when they're utilizing a ton of energy to produce offspring, or progeny in this case, fruiting and more seeds and pollen. An interesting fact for us, though, is that the human eye actually picks up very well on green and yellow wavelengths. So when a manufacturer, in the case of light bulbs, when a manufacturer is making a light intended for human use in a home, these light bulbs will actually be emitting a lot of green and yellow light for us to be able to see in our homes. And you would think with that it wouldn't work very well for a plant, but again, I'll get into that again in a little bit, but it actually does work quite well. If you decide as a houseplant owner that you want to use blue or red grow lights, those are available to you to purchase, I would highly recommend using eye protection, as it can cause a significant amount of strain on the human eye because it's not what we're naturally built to be able to see in our day-to-day lives. Now, the last question I have on my list here is, what kind of light do I need if I'm deciding to use artificial? The first thing you want to consider is, how much of a budget do you have? In my opinion, it's you don't need a whole lot of money to get a startup. I have this plant here. Yes, it's the right way. It is a grow lamp from Fairy Morris. It's the one I have right here behind me. This only cost me about $30, and I purchased it from Lowe's. I would assume that you can probably find this at most hardware stores for about the same price. There are other, obviously, if you search grow light, you're going to find a whole ton of varieties and manufacturers, and they can vary from $30 to thousands, depending on the setup that is being purchased for. But keep in mind that this is an investment, and eventually, depending on how much you pay to buy it, it will pay itself off in the long run. And the other thing is to assess your needs. What are you trying to do with this light? Are you looking at maintaining a healthy, mature plant through a dormant season? Are you looking at starting seedlings in the spring, or doing cuttings off of your succulents or things like that? In my opinion, if you are doing seedlings, I would almost always recommend having a grow light. It is extremely efficient for your process of starting seedlings, and you're going to have less, not success, I'm thinking of the other word, you're gonna have less failure if you have a grow light available when you're doing seedlings in the spring. So if you can afford $30 to pop out a grow light such as this one, I would highly recommend it if you want to do things like that. Now, your options when you Google is, obviously you're going to see a lot of the red and blue lights, as I mentioned before. Those can run a little expensive from what I found when I was doing my own research, but there's obviously nothing wrong with getting those type of lamps. I do want to mention that even with my previous section here talking about the myth of red and blue light, like a lot of commercial growers use red and blue light exclusively to produce plants to sell wholesale. It works perfectly fine in most settings to grow healthy plants. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just, I wanted to have you guys know that it's not the only thing plants need. They do need additional lighting configurations to be able to be at their absolute healthiest. There is another type of bulb that I found called a full spectrum. These are going to be your absolute most expensive, except for one I was found. I'd like to trial it before I talk to you guys about it, but it's only about $15, and I think I might pick some up to see how they do with some of my mature plants, since they are considered a full spectrum and should be emitting the full set of wavelengths from violet to red. And the other thing to consider for growers is where you live. If you have at any point of the year the ability to put your plants outside in almost direct sunlight, if you can, I would highly recommend that. I mentioned again in that last section about UV light. It is actually quite important to the growth of a plant. Like I said, it acts kind of like a booster to photosynthesis. So if a plant is receiving UV light, it's actually going to go through its photosynthesis process extremely more efficiently than it would without the UV light. So if you have the chance to put your plants outside and not use the artificial light for them, I would recommend that over having them inside all year round. But as far as what the questions that I had and the research I was able to do, that's all I have for you guys today. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to put them down in the comments. I may not know the answer, but I'm willing to do some research for you guys to find that answer. And make sure you stick around for some more guides, but in the meantime, stay cool and don't forget to wet your plants.